Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It's part 2 of the November 2021 Q&A. We're here in Steve's studio, which for you guys, you've seen it a few times. For me, it was the first time, so, well, at least in person. And gotta say, it's been a lot of fun being here, but forgetting all of that for now, there are more questions to be answered. So let's get straight into that. But before we do,
today's video sponsor is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryonaut Extreme, which is now available in a 2-gram syringe. This high-performance thermal paste delivers maximum thermal conductivity thanks to an extremely small particle size and layer thickness. It's also very flexible, capable of standing up to sub-zero temperatures for extreme overclocking, but also performs exceptionally well for air and water cooling applications. So if your CPU or GPU needs repasting, then I suggest checking out the Thermal Grizzly range. Link is in the video description.
why did Nvidia and AMD not release budget GPUs like the RTX 3050 and RX 6500 XT yet? Oh, nearly stuffed that, but I got it. Do they even exist? What is the future of budget segment in GPU market after and during the supply crisis? The thought that Nvidia won't make $150 GPUs at MSRP is like imagining AMD would stop making Ryzen 3s and Intel would stop making Pentiums and i3s, which is mind-boggling and concerning. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts, but I think at the start, they could make a 3050, like that does exist as a GPU. The actual GA107 die is used for laptops, so we know that die exists. And there are strong rumors that the Navi 24 die that would probably be used for a 6500 XT do exist. But obviously, they want to make as much money as they possibly can on high-end GPUs while people are still willing to pay exorbitant prices. I think that's mostly why we've seen these GPUs delayed a lot longer than we'd normally see.
Yes. So, as we've talked about, they've obviously secured a certain amount of silicon wafers.
Yep.
And they pre-purchase those based on, okay, so we're going to sell this many 3090s, this many 3080s, this many 3070s, 3060s, so on and so forth. And they obviously anticipate they'll sell more $200-ish or less GPUs, but they get more of those per wafer. So they work out how many of those wafers they have to allocate to those product lines, and that's generally how it goes. The problem we're faced with at the moment, which you guys are painfully aware of, is that the demand is just so insanely sky high. People are paying stupid amounts for graphics cards, and therefore the higher margin parts are selling really well. So rather than do the usual staggered releases where you go down the product stack, there's no incentive for them to do that. They're like, well, we're still selling all of the high margin silicon that we can possibly produce, so divert everything to that. And that means it doesn't make sense to. And I mean, if you care about money, you can't really release these lower end parts that you guys want. And so that's why we're seeing this.
Yeah, I mean, in previous generations, you used to see like let's say an RTX 2060 as an example. Mm-hmm. That was released when you could very easily go into a store and buy an RTX 2080.
Yeah.
Like those are on store shelves. So Nvidia's like, okay, well, we're not selling through those anymore. So now it makes sense to release the next tier down to capture a new group of buys that weren't there. Whereas right now, there's no not capturing people. Everyone is just going for the top-end GPUs, and they're selling RTX 3090s for $3,000. So
yeah, the way to think about it is, if they have 200 wafers, we're just plucking a number out, they've got 200 round disks, and out of those disks, they can punch certain size holes to make certain size GPUs. And generally, they're like, okay, well, we can only sell so many of the big ones, so then we're going to make them smaller and smaller and smaller. But if they're like, the biggest GPUs we can punch out of these wafers, we will sell every single last one of them. And that's where we make the most amount of money per wafer. They only make those. So that's basically what we're seeing. They're just focusing on the high-end products because they don't have to filter down to meet those lower-end markets. Because typically, a lot of you guys will be sitting there going, I'm willing to spend $300, or I'm willing to spend $200, or $150. And you'll just sit there and wait for the $150 price point to be met. And you can do that because there's only so many people above you that are willing to spend $1,000 or $700. But now it's been proven there's plenty of people willing to spend $3,000, $2,000, and with the current supply that they have available. So if they had 100 times the supply they had, they would have already met that demand, and they'd now be selling them at lower price points. It still may be a bit inflated,
And, part of this question is, what is the future of the budget segment? I think we've talked previously about how, the GPU market and a lot of markets operate in cycles, and we're just in the boom period.
Yeah.
It's been a longer boom period than we'd normally expect due to a variety of reasons we've discussed at length.
Yeah.
But there's no indication that what we're seeing now means that the $150 GPUs that you're worried about is like a dead category. Who knows what it's going to be like in 5 years? I mean, there's going to be inflation, obviously, so that's going to adjust the price range of the mid-range and low-end. But if we're talking about will there be a low-end market in a different time, maybe we're in a different part of the cycle when GPUs aren't as popular, then there'll be a lot of incentive once again to produce low-end GPUs.
Yeah, we believe we're in the cycle, the peak of the cycle, the boom, let's say, for graphics cards. But if this was to be the new norm, then those products are dead.
Pretty much.
Obviously, there's been big investment by Intel and TSMC to expand manufacturing capacity, but that won't come online for quite some time yet.
Yeah,
I
think it's more complicated than just being dead, though, because you have to wonder, for example, how many people this generation spent exorbitant amounts of money upgrading and now are not going to consider upgrading for years and years and years. So it's possible that even though we may be in a boom continuing for quite some time, that over time there's not going to be people who are willing to upgrade as they would have been previously, which would create all sorts of different things.
But it doesn't matter if half of the market walks away. If they've only got supply for the half that's interested and they're willing to buy the top end, so that's the demand thing. As long as the demand outstrips the supply of those really premium flagship products, then that's all you're going to get.
Yeah,
because they won't filter down until they need to capture. Because the whole thing about filtering down is to incentivize people to finally part with their money.
Yeah, I guess what I'd be suggesting is that that half of the market is going to go away, but in the higher end because people got burnt so hard this time that they may decide to wait longer than normal. But again, that would take like a few years to eventuate.
There's definitely a good percentage of those people that buy flagship GPUs every single time they come out, though.
Yeah, that's true. I think there's been some people that have been frustrated. The frustration of, I really want them. Eventually, Nvidia and AMD have worn these customers down to the point where they would have been $300 buys, but now they're like, I guess I'll spend $700 or.
Basically, we both agree, though. We believe we're in the boom period for GPU sales, and it will cool off at some point in the future, and things will become a bit more.
Yeah, pretty much.
Old school, normal-ish.
We'll see. Nick asks, from what AMD have said to you, do you think the Vcache CPUs are going to be an X570 based CPU? I wouldn't mind one more CPU generation on the X570 platform to get more life out of my X570 board. So I assume by X570 you're also kind of talking about all AM4 motherboards, because you would expect it would also work on other things. But I think the Vcache, the whole point of Vcache is they're basically taking their existing design, chucking a little bit of cache as a chip on top of the existing die and calling it a day. So I'd be very surprised if it used a different socket. So I think it's pretty much going to be
I think that's what the X570S refresh was all about, which was oddly timed, but whatever. But yeah, I agree with that.
But so yeah, should work in X570 is my expectation, and it will also work, I would assume, with several other AM4 boards. Whether they cut out X470 and B450 is up in the air, but it's going to work on stuff you already have for sure.
Well, at least X570. Okay, have you ever considered making and testing the average PC? Are the most common components put into a PC and testing on current games? I think we did. Anyway, I'll finish the question. You could continue it by suggesting the best upgrade route, etc. Many thanks. Keep up the great content. So you did like the Amazon PC build, right? I think I might have benchmarked that as well.
I collected the data to find the most popular components from each of the segments, like the CPU that you guys were buying the most, the GPU. And then I think you looked at that video and you said, I can actually build that computer. So
I think that's right, yeah. I remember, It
was a fairly good PC in the end, but...
Was it like B450?
Something like that.
Ryzen 5 3600 maybe, or 2600, somewhere around there. Can't remember the GPU now. I think it was an Nvidia GPU,
would have been like a 2070 or 2060 at the time.
I'm sure it was that high end. But anyway, it was quite a good PC. But yes, we have done that sort of content before. We may do it again in the future. The reason why we haven't done any build guide or any content like this is because it's not really that great to do. Hey guys, here's a really good value PC that you guys should be building or are building. And yeah, the GPU costs more than every other component combined. Test system. Do you feel Alder Lake at launch is ready for GPU test system? Do you feel it's very necessary? Are you a bit afraid of performance issues that might arise? Also with Zen 3D probably taking the performance leadership again on traditional core layout. So just wait it out for now. Yeah, I mean, that's the plan. There's multiple reasons for why we moved to a Ryzen test system. We first did it with Zen 2, and it was heaps of drama around that because we did it with a 3950X. But big part of the reason we did it was because you guys wanted us to. I know it was sort of like, oh, the AMD fanboys wanted them too, but we had like 70,000 votes or something like that. So I doubt there's 70,000 AMD fanboys that follow the channel on a regular basis, but whatever you want to believe. There were multiple really good value Zen 2 CPUs, so that's why lots of you bought them. So lots of you guys wanted to see us starting to test with CPUs that were relevant to you and not Intel CPUs that weren't good value, like the 9900K, for example, or whatever came after that. So that's sort of how that happened. And then we moved to the 5950X, obviously, because a lot of people were interested in Zen 3, and that CPU is much faster and sort of got them on par with Intel. And with Alder Lake being a smidgen faster, there's no point doing all of that testing again because it's not going to change any of the graphics card recommendations. And even when Vcache comes out, it may be something that we update all of that, but we can probably see the 5950X out for like another year and then go to Zen 4, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think it doesn't sound like in the next 6 months there's going to be any major high-end GPU releases, and that's really the main concern around choosing a slightly slower CPU versus a slightly faster one is, high-end GPUs are going to be more likely to run into CPU limits, but we're not expecting, an RTX 4090 in the first quarter of next year. Mm-hmm. We're at best going to get low-end GPUs that for testing is going to be still perfectly fine on Zen 3.
That's right.
You made some comments on your feelings about the 12GB 2060, but in regards to workstation workloads like video editing and 3D rendering, do you think the card would be interesting in that category? We don't do a lot of investigations into those workstation apps with GPUs. My first thought, though, would be, while it does have more VRAM, which tends to benefit those workloads, the 2060 isn't exactly the most powerful GPU going around. So I'm not sure too many people would be doing massive simulations and rendering workloads on a card that's only the power of a 2060. I think you'd much rather even a 3060, which is also a 12GB card and obviously much more powerful GPUs. So I think it's not really going to benefit. It's not going to be the main draw card to that market. I think the main reason why Nvidia wants to release this 2060, as we talked about, is it potentially is cheaper to make, and adding 12GB just makes it a new, but not really new, product. If they re-released the 6GB model, people would be like, oh, well, why didn't you do this before? Whereas I guess the 12GB card to a very minor extent mitigates that and it kind of makes it new. But again, I think it's mostly a card that's meant to alleviate supply constraints, prevent miners using it, even though miners will still use it. And yeah, be mainly for gamers.
Yeah, it'd be interesting what availability and pricing and all that is like, but
it's not going to be great.
No.
If you had the resources, so money, expertise, people, etc., what would you like to change about your review process for equipment, if anything? For example, automated benchmarking, temperature measurement, color calibration, what's going on? So what would you like to improve? Would you like to have an army of workers that you can come in and get them to do all the testing for you?
Not really. It's hard enough keeping everything in check with just me doing it. Could you imagine with a couple of people and then like settings are different or they haven't quite done the benchmark pass right? And yeah, because of the data we provide you guys is the most important thing, I wouldn't really feel comfortable getting someone else to do it. I'd rather be able to blame myself for any mistakes than anyone else, to be honest. But as for like testing equipment, I can't think of anything because really for me the games are the test equipment. I definitely like for gaming benchmarks in particular I would never do like automated rather.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work. Like for example that Battlefield video I did for a good number of reasons you couldn't do automated testing. And then I'm trying to think, I'm racking my brain on equipment, but really I've got everything I need. Yeah, there's nothing. What about you?
No, I think it's pretty similar. I think, we've got very decent, thermocouples for your VRM testing. We've got decent monitor testing tools and all that sort of thing. So,
Yep.
especially, I'm sure there's room for improvement, but there's no major things that I think we really need around here. No fan testers, for example.
No. I've invested quite a few $1,000s in things like really good, 8-channel K-type thermocouple, the digital measurement stuff, thermal measurement stuff, like infrared cameras and that. Usually I just use that for like diagnostic stuff, like finding the hot spots to put the actual thermocouples. No, I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
Based on what we know now, what core layout do you expect the i3s and Pentiums will have? So what did we get last time? We got 4 cores. So we didn't get an 11th gen Core i3 range.
But they were rebranded.
So it was a 10th gen refresh, which was 4 cores with 8 threads. So hyper-threading, their SMT technology. And then we believe we're getting some Core i5s without the E-cores.
Potentially, the 6+0 configuration.
So, and that's been, I haven't followed this too closely because I don't really pay attention to it, but that's been suggested that's a Core i5 part, like a low-end Core i5.
Yeah, I'd expect so. I think with the, you can fit, there's a lot of things they could do. They could run, say, 4
with some
P-cores and maybe, because they can only have...
like 2 E-cores or 4
I don't think they can
E-cores.
run 2 E-cores, can they? Aren't they clusters of 4?
No, you can
in terms of disabling them, as in lasering them off on the die, because the cache is coherent among them.
Right.
Each quad core cluster of E cores has 2 megabytes
you can definitely
of L2.
disable them at the firmware level, but whether you can laser them off, not sure on that one.
So I guess the possible configurations would be maybe a 4+4 for like a high end Core i3, which would be interesting to see how that would go versus a 6+0. And then you have obviously the 4+0, which would be a lower end. But then on top of that,
could be like a Pentium though.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible that they will use the mobile dies for the very low end ones, because Intel has already shown the designs for the mobile, and one of them, I believe, the high performance mobile should look like something like a 6+8 configuration maximum. But the low power ones, I believe, will only have 2 P cores on the die plus 8 of the E cores.
Okay.
So the die physically does not, even the maximum die physically does not have the cores on it.
Yeah, it's a different silicon.
So it's possible that we may see low-end Pentiums and... Do they have Celerons anymore? I'm not sure, but...
they have had them. I can't remember how recently.
Yeah, it's possible that you'll see Pentiums with a 2 performance cores enabled. Will they do no performance cores, like just 4 E cores or 8 E cores? That's another possibility.
Well, it's kind of like... No.
That would be great for gaming, but
that would be good. Well, maybe, but I don't really see the point, to be honest. But I don't know. Anyway, but point is, I guess we have no idea. So this was a sort of, what do you think? Yeah. So we'll move on. Okay, would you consider having the occasional Linux benchmarks, any CPU benchmark that has a Linux counterpart, as well as a Shadow of the Tomb Raider or any other game that has native Vulkan support on Windows and Linux, for comparisons with Windows performance? No, not really. Like we've looked at Linux once on the channel, or at least I have, and that was to see what was going on with the Threadripper 2990WX, I believe it was.
Yep.
The 32 core part that was a bit funny configuration. So it's really only going to be like sort of specialized content that's using Linux for some kind of investigation. I'm not really interested in Linux performance. That's not the sort of channel we are. And there's other channels on YouTube that
do a good job of covering Linux.
Yeah, Nick from Gear Seekers looks at Linux quite often, includes specialized Linux benchmarks and videos. So if you're interested in that, definitely go over to the Gear Seekers website, because you'll find that there. But there's heaps of people that do that. Well, not heaps, but there are other people that aren't us that do that, and we're not going to do it. So we'll leave that up to them to do. You can't do everything. Okay, is it just me feeling that the generational improvement in performance for GPU comes with a price of much higher MSRP and power draw is not a good trend? Just a few years ago, a 550 watt PSU was enough for any single GPU system. But according to rumors, top model next gen GPU alone can drop to 450 watts plus.
Yeah, it feels like something that's been a really hot topic at the moment, isn't it? It's power consumption. We had a question earlier about power consumption as well. And I guess there's a lot of worry about like, oh, how am I going to cool these 450 watt GPUs? But I think the first thing to point out is that even though they're increasing power draw and there's trends of higher MSRP, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to go backwards in efficiency and like performance per dollar. At the moment, we kind of have gone backwards in performance per dollar, but if we're talking about just a generalized normal market trend for high MSRPs, that doesn't always mean that, cards just get more expensive but don't deliver the performance that should accompany a higher price tag. And the same with power draw. You know, the RTX 3090 is one of the most power-hungry GPUs we've seen, but it also performs a lot better than most of the GPUs we've previously seen. So they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, again, but it's that flagship Halo product diminishing returns thing. So
exactly.
The 3080 does use less power and it's closer to that efficiency window. And then you get down to the 3070. And it's the same thing you see on the Radeon side as well. Like a 550 watt power supply, a decent one, you should be able to run like a 6700 XT. AMD probably recommends 650 or 750 or whatever it may be. But that card with a good CPU, I don't have the power numbers in front of me, but it's not astronomical. I guess what I'm trying to say is you see the power run away the way it is now on the CPU and GPU front when there's competition. When there's no competition and one manufacturer, one company has a significant architectural advantage, that's when overclocking's really cool, because they'll heavily segment the product line and they'll leave heaps of performance on the table because they'll just keep it well within the efficiency window because there's no arms race. Again, we saw that with the 1200K. If the 5950X and 5900X didn't exist, the 1200K wouldn't be pushed anywhere near where it is. That would be the overclocking spec. When you overclock it and take it out of spec, that's the kind of power draw you would see. The real power draw would be in the 100 watt range, not well into the 200 watt range. And the reason they've done that, again, the arms race thing, they're trying to beat the 5950X in things like Cinebench and stuff like that. So they've just pushed the CPU as high as they really can while maintaining stability.
I think with these GPUs, we've gone from, and this is something we've talked about before, is that we've gone from a market where high-end buyers used to have SLI in their systems. Like you would run 2 GPUs. Some people were crazy and would run 3 GPUs in their system. And these would be 3 like 200, 250 watt GPUs. So cumulatively, you've got a 500 or even 750 watts of GPU in your system. And they're harder to cool because you're stacking them, you're crowding them up.
Quad SLI and stuff.
But then SLI and Crossfire died. It was obviously not a way to scale very well. Game developers weren't supporting it. The drivers team stopped supporting it. So for a little while there, the very top end of the market actually went backwards in power consumption. We stopped having dual GPUs. Now we just had a single 250 watt, 300 watt GPU. And now it seems like the solution to that is going back the other way, but with just one GPU. So it's nothing unusual to see 550, 600 watts of GPU power, and that's potentially what we'll see in the future, just with those Halo tier $2,000 GPUs that would have been SLI setups back in 2008 or
everyone seems really concerned about this, but there'll be new manufacturing processes. You're going to see an improvement in efficiency, a big leap forward.
If we had a 500 watt GPU, it's going to be massively faster than what we've got today. Like there's just no doubt about it, like double, triple the performance.
So if you're concerned about power usage, you buy the mid-range card that uses sort of mid-range power, but it's still going to be a lot faster because it'll be more efficient.
All right, we're going to hit pause on the questions for now. There is more questions to be answered, and we'll get to that in part 3, which will be up on the channel shortly. And of course, if you missed part 1 as well, for some reason you've watched the whole way in part 2 and you haven't watched part 1, go back and watch that.
There's more of this?
I know. We answer a lot of questions each month. So go back and watch that. But I guess what at this point? 20% club.
20% club, all that
Patreon
stuff.
and Float Plane. Sign up if you haven't already. Get the Discord community. Get the live streams. Get the behind the scenes.
All good stuff.
You're making a behind the scenes about what we've been doing here.
I am filming a behind. I filmed Tim's. I don't know what to call it because it's not. It's a live reaction, not shown live.
Yeah, a live reaction that you're like, hey, I'm going to film you right as I rocked up. I'm like,
but it was still
all right. I guess I'm in on this.
It was still a live reaction to seeing the new studio build for the first time. We'll find a better way of describing that in the future. But yes, Tim hadn't seen the mega desk and all the stuff I'd been working on. He hadn't seen it in person, so I filmed him seeing it in person for the first time. It was quite interesting seeing his reaction. So if you're interested in that, that is part of the things you get when you sign up for the Float Plane or Patreon, is behind the scenes content. So riveting stuff there. And again, Discord, Q&As, all that kind of stuff. There's heaps of stuff there. We talk about it all the time. So if you're interested, links in the video description. But if not,
I'm your host, Tim.
And I'm your host, Steve.
We'll see you in the next one.